Welcome to The Explainer. When we think of Vikings, it's all horned helmets and savage raids, right? But what if I told you that legend is only half the story? Today, we're going to go way beyond the myth to uncover the true, complex, and absolutely fascinating world of the Vikings.
So go ahead, picture a Viking in your head right now. What do you see? I'm betting it's a huge, fearsome warrior, probably wearing a horned helmet, getting ready for a fight. But how much of that image, that pop culture icon, is actually real?
Okay, this is where we start to pull back the curtain. Let's just bust some myths right off the bat. Those iconic horned helmets? Yeah, that was made up for an opera in the 1800s. Total fiction. And the idea that they drank from the skulls of their enemies? It's a great story, but there's zero historical evidence for it. And sure, they were fierce, no doubt about it, but they weren't any more brutal than lots of other groups at the time. The reality is so much more interesting.
All right, so here's our game plan for today. First, we're going beyond the horned helmet to see where these folks actually came from. Then, we'll dive into how they became masters of the lightning raid. After that, we'll see how they were also founders of new worlds, explore the incredible gods, myths, and Valhalla that drove them. And finally, we'll figure out how an era ended.
So, first things first, let's set the stage. Before all the raiding and exploring, who were these people, really? To get the Vikings, you have to start where they started, the rugged, windswept coasts of Scandinavia. They came from the area we now know as Denmark, Norway, and Sweden. And yeah, they were often described as tall and fair-haired. But here's a little fact that might surprise you. Their homeland wasn't some frozen wasteland. Thanks to the Gulf Stream, this warm ocean current coming all the way from the tropics, their climate was actually pretty moderate. It made these northern lands way more habitable than they had any right to be.
Okay, now let's get to the part that made them legendary across all of Europe, the raid. But you've got to understand, this wasn't just mindless savagery. Oh no, this was a calculated, terrifying, and brutally effective strategy. Their signature move was called the Strand Hog. You can kind of think of it as a Viking blitzkrieg. It was anything but random. It was a brutally efficient two-step process. First, reconnaissance. They'd secretly scout out the coastline to find the richest, least defended targets. Then came the lightning attack. They'd hit you from the sea, fast and hard, and be gone before you could even think about mounting a defense.
And man, did they get around. The Viking Age really kicks off in the year 793 with this shocking raid on a peaceful monastery in Britain called Lindisfarne. That one event sent a wave of terror through Christian Europe. But that was just the start. They sailed deep into enemy lands, rowing up rivers to hit inland cities like Seville in Spain. They even, under the legendary Ragnar Lothbrok, took a whole fleet up the River Seine and laid siege to Paris itself. Can you imagine?
But here's where the story gets so much bigger. Because if you only think of the Vikings as raiders, you are missing like half the picture. They were also some of the greatest sailors, explorers, and nation builders of their time.
And their secret weapon? It was their incredible naval technology. They had the right tool for every job. For raiding, you had the famous Drakkar, or dragon ship. Think of it as a military sports car. It was light, incredibly fast, and its shallow hull meant it could sail right up rivers. But for building an empire, you needed the Nar. This was their cargo ship, their moving van. It was slower, sure, but it was wide and deep, built to carry supplies, livestock, and entire families to new homes across the sea. And with those ships, they went, well, everywhere. A Viking leader named Rollo was so tough that the King of France basically just gave him a chunk of the country to get him to stop raiding. It became Normandy, the land of the Northmen. In the east, Swedish Vikings traveled down rivers and helped establish the state of Kiev non Rus, which is the origin of modern Russia. They conquered Sicily. They even became the elite personal bodyguards for the emperor in Constantinople. And of course, with their sturdy Nars, they pushed the boundaries of the known world, settling Iceland and then Greenland. But their greatest journey, their biggest leap, was into the total unknown. A leader named Leif Erikson sailed his crew all the way to North America. He established a settlement in what is now Newfoundland, Canada. Now let that sink in for a second. They reached the New World a full 500 years before Christopher Columbus. The colony didn't last, but the achievement is just staggering.
So you have to wonder, right? What drove these people? What made them risk everything, crossing stormy oceans and charging into bloody battles? To really understand the Viking mindset, you have to look at what they believed in, their gods, their myths, and their unique idea of the afterlife.
At the absolute center of their warrior culture was Valhalla.
For a Viking, dying bravely in combat wasn't failure. It was the ultimate victory. It was your one-way ticket to Odin's Great Hall. There, you'd spend your days feasting and fighting, getting ready for Ragnarok, the final epic battle at the end of the world. A belief like that doesn't just take away the fear of death. It makes a glorious death something you actively chase.
And their universe was just epic. They believed our world, the world of mortals, which they called Midgard, was physically linked to Asgard, the realm of the gods, by a shimmering, burning rainbow bridge called the Bifrost. I mean, can you imagine living in a world like that? A world filled with magic, prophecy, and a literal bridge to the heavens?
And this world was ruled by quite a cast of characters. You had Odin, the head honcho, the All-Father, god of war, wisdom, and poetry. Then there's his son, the mighty Thor, defender of humanity with his famous hammer. You've got Heimdall, the cosmic guardian of that rainbow bridge. And then the fearsome Valkyries, these warrior women who would decide which fallen heroes were worthy of being escorted to Valhalla.
But this ancient world of gods and myths was about to run into a powerful new force, Christianity. Now, the conversion didn't happen overnight. For a while, a lot of Vikings kind of hedged their bets, praying to both Jesus and Thor, just in case. But the new faith offered something powerful, especially to women and common men. It promised that everyone had an eternal soul and a place in the afterlife, not just the warriors who died in battle.
So what happened? Where did all the Vikings go? Well, they didn't just vanish. The end of the Viking Age wasn't about extinction. It was about a dramatic transformation, and it all comes to a head in one of the most famous years in history.
The year is 1066, and it is a total showdown. The English king dies with no heir, so there's a mad dash for the throne. First, the king of Norway, Harald Hardrada, a true old-school Viking king, invades. He's defeated and killed. And a lot of people point to that battle and say that was the end of the Viking Age. But it wasn't, because just a few weeks later, another army invades, led by William, the Duke of Normandy. And William is a direct descendant of the Viking Rollo. And he wins. He conquers all of England. And this is the real takeaway. The age of Viking raids didn't just fizzle out. It ended with one final spectacular and completely successful Viking conquest. They didn't disappear. They assimilated. They became the kings, the dukes, the rulers of the very nations they once terrorized. After his victory, William the Conqueror founded a new dynasty that ruled England for almost a century. The blood of those Norse raiders was now flowing in the veins of European royalty. Their legacy wasn't dragon ships on the horizon anymore. It was castles and crowns. Which leaves us with this final, fascinating question to think about. Did the Vikings really vanish? Or did they just conquer the world one last time, not with an axe, but by becoming part of its very DNA? Thanks for joining us on The Explainer.